welcome and welcome to our second Future Funding webinar. We've got two brilliant speakers today, Jules Hillier from PAWS and Emma Noyce from Hampshire Library Services. But first of all, I'm just going to actually, we've still got people coming through. I'm just going to kind of talk a bit through what we're going to talk about today and what we're not going to do. So what we're not trying to do with the stuff around income generation strategy is present a strategy for you to lift and just dump in your library service, because that's not really going to work, and we need to have things that are tailored to our own specific circumstances. And we're also not telling you what your strategy needs to work, needs to contain to work, and what it should have in it. But what we are doing is giving you some tools to consider how to build a more balanced strategy, highlight some areas that you might want to consider when you're putting it together, and then sharing examples of what's worked for libraries and approaches taken outside the sector, which is why we've got Jules and Emma here. One thing that worked from my perspective, Emma might have more feedback on this later, really well about a year or so ago, was when Emma, I think, had just started at Hampshire and was looking to put together an income generation strategy. And she had a live chat on the Heads of Service Basecamp group.
I was wondering what you were going to say there, because I was thinking, what did I do? What did I do? But yes, I remember that. That was good. Yeah, campfire.
Yes, and one thing that we'd like to be able to do as well is facilitate some of those on the Income Generation Network as well. So we'll be asking at the end, basically, for any suggestions on what those kind of, basically any burning questions that anyone's got, or anything that where people are just sort of stuck, they're trying to do something and they've just got all these obstacles in front of them, and could do with actually just a discussion with peers who have got some knowledge but not necessarily specific knowledge of their local area, just to bounce ideas around and start to get a bit of direction. So having a look at these, we've got two tools, and what I kind of always say, I think I said last week as well, with tools, is that tools are always wrong but sometimes useful. So nothing will be perfectly applicable to your situation, and especially when we're looking at some of these business tools, which are literally just 4 blocks, these 2x2 grids, which seem to be just incredibly popular in any sort of business or MBA program as well. But they're useful ways to see things. And I always think that having a couple of different tools and actually using the 2 different tools to see a problem or an issue or a developing strategy from 2 different perspectives actually gives a much broader picture, and can help kind of iron out and eliminate you getting stuck into the failings of any individual tool. So what we've done quite a lot, what we do quite a lot in the third sector, is look at how to balance risk using grids like this. So for example, this is one that we have used in the past, where essentially splitting stuff into commission services, trading, grants, and fundraised income. And the reason we're doing that is because the opportunities and volatility in all of those different areas are completely different. So commission services are great. So if you're commissioning from health, that's absolutely brilliant. If there is a huge change in the way health services are structured or arranged, as happened with CCGs a few years back with the Lansley reforms, then that can essentially kind of remove all your commissioning arrangements, but potentially give you other opportunities. But there's quite a lot of volatility there as well. Similarly, if there's a change of government, they might have a different perspective on public sector outsourcing, and so things might be brought back into local authorities, or more things might go out, which might bring other competitors in as well. So there's quite a lot of potential volatility there. And also with commission services, we're stuck with a contract that is time limited as well. So we then need to look at what the process is around rebidding and retendering for those things as well. For trading, and I'm kind of including that sort of sponsorship, venue hire, so selling the space that we've got as libraries, whether it's physical or virtual space as well. A lot of that is down to, and it is volatile in relation to kind of the local economic climate, and also the national changes there as well. Fundraised income, which I'm looking at in terms of from individuals, so community fundraising, events and activities and that kind of thing, and also potentially legacies. Again, is something, legacies are completely unpredictable. And community fundraising is one of those things that is dependent very much on the community that you've got and how they're experiencing their own financial and personal lives as well. And then grants is, I think, particularly interesting, where we've got a mixture in this sector. At the moment, we've got a lot of sort of semi-statutory grants through the Arts Council or DCMS, which really fund, I think, a lot of the grant-funded activity in the library sector. But there's a wider world, obviously, which is being tapped into a certain extent of charitable trusts as well. But charitable trusts, we know that, I mean, the way they work is that they've got a huge pot of money and they invest it, and the returns on that investment is what then goes to the grants that are given out that year. So since 2008, the returns they've got off those grants have been much smaller. So where previously investment returns have been kind of 10, 20%, a standard kind of interest rate now is 0%, if we're lucky. And that doesn't look like that's changing as well. So the actual money coming through that is more limited. And also as the demand increases for services like this, then there's more competition there as well. So there's kind of two bits in there, which are both quite volatile. So essentially with these, the idea with this this grid, the idea is then just to try and spread across it as well, to try and look at ideally a quarter in each, but realistically it's not going to be like that because the opportunities available won't be like that. But make sure that you haven't got all of your eggs in one basket essentially, and they're spread across the different things, across the different quadrants there. And then similarly, don't see it as something that's fixed in time. So one example that we have used in the past where is the idea of using grant-funded pilots to then become commissioned services. So we might have something that we know is a service that will benefit people, we think that the service will benefit people in terms of reducing access to GP surgeries. So we do a pilot, we get charitable funding from that, that's a fixed term pilot, say 1 or 2 years, but at the end of it, we then have some evidence to demonstrate impact, so we can then take that to commissioners, and commissioners might be able to commission those services on the back of that. Whereas if we just went straight to commissioners, we wouldn't necessarily be able to do that. So see these things not as sort of fixed pots, but as things that we might want to develop, and perhaps particularly with the grants and commission services, start to develop a bit of a pipeline of pilot projects shifting into essentially really sort of demonstration projects for potential commission services. So looking at that, we can then look at it in a slightly different perspective, where we've got this other type of analysis called a dual bottom line analysis, which sounds more complicated than it is. Essentially what it's looking at is, are things bringing in an income or a profit or a surplus, or are they contributing to an organization's objectives and contributing to social impact? So we looked last week, or the week before last, at the donut economics model, which was really focusing on how can libraries structure their activities so that they can meet the resource gaps of people and essentially address social impact through there, through those activities. And so this dual bottom line idea is to look at what kind of things will bring high income or low income, and what kind of things will bring social impact or won't actually bring any social impact as well. So then that gives us a sense of how we then structure them within an income strategy. So first of all, looking at something that isn't bringing an income and isn't bringing any social impact, we just need to question what we're doing it for. And I think that needs to be sort of the first thing that we go through, and just eliminate the stuff that isn't providing any kind of benefit. We've then got high income or high surplus as well, and high social impact. So they're perfect projects. They're the ones that are fully funded, full cost recovery. It's bringing in additional income on top of that, and that can then subsidize some of the other projects. And the other projects you might think about funding are these ones. So the high social impact and low income. So it might be that you've got some projects that you know are making a huge difference to people, but you're not able to even cover the costs of that project or that service. And that's fine, because what we're trying to do is make a difference to people. And if we're able to understand the costs that subsidy, the subsidies that service needs, then we can make sure we've got the right other projects in place to subsidise them. And then similarly, we've got high income or surplus services with little social impact as well. So they're good because they bring the funding in, but they're good as long as that subsidies are effectively used. If we start to just provide those services, then we lose that sense of what we're doing. We lose our sense of purpose. We lose our sense of being a library and being part of a community if we're just focused on income or surplus. So they're good with that caveat that they need to be used for something. Perfect projects, obviously, fully funded and can subsidise others. And then the high social impact and low income are the ones that we want to be doing, but we also need to have some partner project to be able to subsidise that as well. And then again, these aren't necessarily things that could be seen as static in time. So we might have something where we've got high social impact. So for example, again, similar example as before, where we've got something where we know we'll have an impact. We don't know how we're going to fund it, but we then work to get to a point where we can actually get sustainable funding from that service as well. And sometimes those projects or services won't always go the same way. There might be some that actually end up having less of a benefit than we'd hoped, and some that might end up more as well. So it's about how we structure these so that we've got a realistic and effective plan for each of them. But equally, those plans need to be quite balanced as well, just to make sure that, again, we're not sticking all our eggs in the one basket of this one service becoming profitable and sustainable. So overall, I'm just going to pull this together and we'll get on to Jules and Emma in a minute as well. So overall, just there's two tools to consider. Those tools will be available on the Income Generation Network as well, just to consider about how to spread and balance risk, as well as identifying pipelines, but then also how to evaluate projects based on impact and income, and making sure that we understand any cross subsidies that are in place, because without that understanding of the cross subsidies, then we really don't know what is actually we don't know whether there's a sustainable strategy as a whole. So I'm going to introduce Jules now, who is the chief exec of a brilliant organisation called Pause. She'll be able to talk more about it and talk about how she's got to the income strategy that she's got to, and the challenges still ahead for her.
Thank you. I will share my screen with you shortly. I'll just start by saying that I have worked in the charity sector for my whole career, which is now almost 30 years. And in that time, I've done an awful lot of fundraising and business development, despite that not ever being my job, and despite that not really being anything that I enjoy very much. So when I became chief exec, I thought maybe I would have some kind of fundraising or business development director. And I do indeed have a pretty spectacular business development director. And yet I still find that I do an awful lot of this work. So I just, I wanted to I guess, set this up to say that this is not my specialism. It's something that I think falls into most senior roles most of the time, and in fact most other roles most of the time, because we're all thinking about where the money is going to come from to do the stuff we love. So let me just share my screen with you, because oh no, sorry, wrong thing. Screen share, there it is. Okay, so just to tell you a little bit about Pause, we are an organisation. We were set up in Hackney in 2013 with our pilot project, and we work with women who've had more than one child taken into care. In fact, the women that we work with have had an average of 3 children taken into care, but in many cases it's many more than that. And in fact, we have worked with women who've had more than 10 children taken into care. So these are very, very vulnerable women with extremely complex lives. And the work we do is difficult, and it is intensive, and it's time consuming, and it costs a lot of money. It's also, luckily, really successful. Pause is not by any means the only organisation doing this work, and in fact over the last 5 years there's been a huge increase, thankfully, in the amount that local authorities have been investing in the women, the kind of women that Pause works with, and the families that Pause works with. The way that Pause operates is as a social franchise, effectively, which means that we have this license to do this work. We have discovered what works, we have a model that we know works, and we license others to act as our delivery partners in local areas. Often those delivery partners are straightforwardly local authorities. They recruit a Pause practice and they deliver the work themselves. Sometimes they commission third sector partners to do the work on their behalf. And the local authorities pay us a license fee in order to be allowed to operate our model. And we think of that, we term that traded income. And just throw into the chat, and once you've been steeped in something for 4 years, you use all sorts of jargon. So if I'm using language that makes no sense to you, then please ask me in the chat. So one of our areas of income is this traded income, which is from a license fee, and that's very specifically for us to do an awful lot of work to make sure that the Pause practices out there are high quality, well trained, have good resources, have good communications, have support for fundraising and developing sustainable strategies, and have a dedicated person to support their delivery the whole time. So we have this traded income, and that's paid to us usually by local authorities, and we use it to support all of that practice work. But we also do other stuff which is really exciting and really interesting and really amazing stuff, but isn't covered by the traded income. And that's the sort of thing like our participation programme, which we call Getting Involved, where, you know, for example, we have an advisory group of women who have experience of the programme, and they meet monthly and they challenge the board and the leadership team on the decisions that we're making, or they take part in focus groups and support us to think about our strategy or whatever it is. That is amazing, amazing work, and I love doing it, but it's not covered by the traded income. When we first started in Hackney in 2013, we were supported by the DFE Innovation Fund, and that was where the vast, vast majority of our money in the early days came from. And we've now moved to a position where we have we're in 35 local authorities across 3 nations, and we have during that time really diversified our income streams, because relying on that one pot of funding was a significant risk. And just to give you a bit of a sense of the kind of numbers that we're dealing with now, as I speak to you, our latest figures are that we're currently across the country working with 606 women who've had between them 1,700 children removed into care. And over the time we've been going, we've now worked with 1,500 women who've had more than 4,500 children taken into care. So we're this kind of slightly odd mixture, actually, of powerful, impactful, amazing work and quite complex, technically tricky finances and you know, this social franchise model and the traded income and so on. And so when I joined Pause 4 years ago, and when I joined Pause, we were very much reliant on national government funding. 81% of our funding was from national government. We had the 11% of our income was traded income, the income from license fees, and 6% was from trusts and foundations, and those were kind of very small trusts and foundations that had been kind of asked for a little bit of funding here, and it wasn't a particular strategy to target trusts and foundations. That money had just we managed to do it. And I think that the first thing to say about where we were in 2017 was that we did not have a formal income diversification strategy. What happened was, and we were much smaller then, we had fewer people. When I joined, we didn't have our amazing Director of Business Development. And at that point, I just made it a bit of a priority to start looking at ways of diversifying our income. And that was our strategy. The Chief Exec is going to make this a priority. And that, I think, is probably the start of a lot of strategies. Somebody somewhere says, this is what we're going to have to do. So let's just start doing it. And I would say at that stage, I didn't want to get bogged down in writing anything down and creating a strategy. So I hope that's not going against anything you've said here. So I kind of threw myself into finding other sources of income. By 2018-19, we had, I would say the other thing that was very useful in creating our strategy, and this is probably something that many of you can relate to, is that our feet were against the fire, because the 3-year grant funding that we had from the Department for Education through the Innovation Fund narrowed. So it started big and it narrowed to a point. And so we had this kind of cliff edge that we were looking at the end of 2020 and thinking, okay, by the end of 2020, we need really to have secured sufficient diversity in our income that losing the DFE income won't matter as much. And gradually, and actually the process that we went through really was to look at major projects through trusts and foundations, because we really wanted to build this interesting, diverse organisation to go with an interesting, diverse funding mix. And so by the end of the 1920 financial year, we felt much more balanced. We did still need some national DFE income during that year, but we had a much greater balance between that and the trusts and foundations. And not only that, but although that trusts and foundations money included some quite big pieces of income, it also included a much, much broader spread of trusts and foundations, so that if one got lost, we still had others that were making up that chunk of trusts and foundations income. And that was quite important, because trusts and foundations are time consuming to apply to get big money, but actually there are ways of just firing off some brief letters and proposals for smaller chunks that make up that bigger part of the pie. And that's also usually core funding, which is brilliant. And we were also increasing our traded income. So as we go down here, the size of the pie gets bigger, as well as the diversity of the income. And that was where we got to. And I would say our actual income strategy probably kicked in halfway through 18-19. That's probably when we got it signed off by the trustees. But we didn't let the absence of a strategy stop us just saying, okay, well, this is what we've got to do. And we'll put some numbers to it and we'll put some targets on it. When we can, when we have time. So the next 2 slides, and my last 2 slides really, are just about what I learned from that process. And I hope these are helpful tips. This is just my learning, and I'm really happy to expand on any of it or answer any questions on it. But the first thing I say is be prepared for the grind. I can't tell you how much I'm really not keen on fundraising and business development. It's why I'm not in it. And it's hard work. And it's boring and time consuming, and you think you've written something perfectly, and then you discover that actually you haven't quite exactly answered the question at the top of their box, which is, and you're allowed 500 words and you've done 540, and you really think you've got it down as much as you can, but you still haven't quite answered their question in exactly the way that, it's the most boring thing. Be ready for that, allow yourself time for that, and give yourself treats. It takes up a lot of time, and you'll need to make lots of applications. They won't all be successful, and some of them will be really time consuming, and you'll end up with nothing, and that's frustrating. And you have to kind of go into it assuming the worst, and that makes every win really, really exciting. It feels like a climb. It feels like you're kind of aiming for something, and it's exhausting kind of traveling up it. And it doesn't happen quickly, and it doesn't happen overnight. But it does get to the point where suddenly things start to come in. So you have this period of putting yourself through the mill, and then it suddenly starts to pay off. And that is a really good feeling. Getting to the summit is a great feeling. But you will be disappointed along the way. So that's my slide of the stuff that's that's horrible. And I thought I'd put that in first to get it out of the way, and just to say that it is just boring and tedious, and you just have to slog at it a bit and share the load, you know, make sure other people are slogging with you. And that's actually really important, and part of what, from my experience, helped us to be really successful. Because it will be okay if you win people's hearts, and that's the bit that I really enjoy, because you should meet with funders, meet with trust and talk to them. Don't just fill in the form, have conversations with them, be charming, make them like you and they will like your organisation. But also involve users, involve the people that they will be making the biggest difference for. Because as soon as a funder is engaged in listening to what an end user has to say, rather than a fundraiser or somebody writing a bid, they get much more excited. So really amplify the voices of the people that will get the most benefit from the money. Make your funders feel good. Never mind all of the rest of it, we'll come on to that. Make them feel good and tell your story really well. So know what your story is and then tell it effectively. Tug on their heartstrings and win their hearts, because that's part of the way that you can draw people into your world. But you also have to win their minds, and that you will be able to do if you can demonstrate the difference that you'll make. So you can tell the story about the difference, but if you can put that with the data about the difference, and you can really demonstrate your impact and you understand the difference that you're making, and that's really crucial, you have to be able to understand it, because in order to tell your story and back it up with facts, you have to be really clear about them. So be clear, be straightforward, be confident, and write it well. You don't need to be flowery. You don't even need to put in long words. Just articulate it effectively. So tell your story and tell it well. Those are the two really important things. And if you're great at telling a story, but you're not a good writer, ask someone to help you with the writing. If you're brilliant at writing, but your narrative is a bit shocking, get someone else to help. So do it in teams. And the other thing you have to win is their wallet. And it's really important that all the way through you're comfortable talking about money. Talk about how much it costs you to deliver your service and be honest about that, because the worst thing you can do is bring in not quite enough to do the project that you really want to do and end up having to rob Peter to pay Paul. So don't shy away from talking about money. Know your costs, really understand your spreadsheets. And if that's not your thing, partner with somebody that really does. And if your thing is spreadsheets, partner with somebody that can really tell a story and do it together. Share that boring load. So know your cost, but also know your value, and talk about the return on investment, talk about the social return on investment and the actual financial return on investment. So do the numbers well. And I reckon if you can tell your story well, if you can write well, and if you can do the numbers well, and if you're prepared to put up with the tedious grind of fundraising, then it really should come together, and you should be able to diversify your income. It's not easy, but it's also not rocket science. I hope that's helpful. I kind of whiz through my learnings from trying to achieve that at Pause. And surround yourself with good people is the other thing, who are interested in doing it. Okay, got some questions. Was it difficult to get the finance monitoring report? Yes. Was it difficult to get the finance monitoring reporting right to be able to see funding diversity? Yes, it was. I think all monitoring is really difficult, and we spend an awful lot of time talking about it at Pause, and we're a young organisation. So we had this, when I first joined, I thought, God, this is going to be amazing. We can collect exactly what we need right from the start, and we'll use it brilliantly, and we'll never collect anything that we don't need. And it's going to be incredible. And 2 years later, I was in the middle of all this data going, what are we collecting? Why are we doing this? Why can't I have simple reporting? I think it's really difficult. I think it helps if you know what you want to demonstrate, obviously. But it does just take time. And honestly, I think that don't get downcast if you look at some of your systems or some of your processes and go, oh, this is not right, and it should be, and I can't quite work out why. Because I just think life is messy, you know. Developing an organization is messy, getting funds is messy, learning stuff is messy. It was difficult to get the finance monitoring right, and it was also, I would say, one of the biggest mistakes I made. I was so thrilled when we got a 3-year grant and then match funding from 2 different big funders to do some work which is genuinely, it makes my heart sing. It's absolutely incredible, and when I speak to the women that are benefiting from it, it's the most exciting thing that comes into my day. It's absolutely brilliant, and I'm proud that I wrote the bid, and I'm delighted that we got it. And I sat down, I did all of it, including all the budgeting and everything, and untangling that when I then had to give it to real people who knew what they were doing to deliver was a pain in the arse for them. That was really hard work. And over the course of 3 years, we've kind of got to a place where we're able to do the monitoring really effectively. But actually, it was incredibly difficult for those teams who were trying to deliver the work that I'd just kind of gone, oh God, well, I'll just chuck in some of this and some of that. And it was pure luck, really, that we got the budgeting right and that we were able to deliver, particularly over the last year, where obviously plans have just gone completely awry. But the biggest mistake I made was just to put my head down in a kind of panic, because I was looking ahead and thinking we must bring in more trusts and not bring in the people that were going to do the job, and we're going to have to do the reporting on the finances and the monitoring the finances and so on. And that was hard for the organization, and I take absolute responsibility that was my error. Did you find the more you applied and gained a reputation, the more other foundations were willing to partner up? It's less about reputation, although some of it is about reputation. I think the reputation thing, we did some really good media, and we did some really good, interesting public stuff, and that did bring in some smaller trusts who wanted to contribute to something, and that was brilliant. I would say that what does happen is that money brings money. So once we had some money, going out and getting match funding for that was easier. And that's how we grew in Northern Ireland and Scotland, was by getting initial big lottery funding that was contingent on being matched, and then going into Northern Ireland and Scotland and saying, okay, we can bring money into the nation if you can match it. And that was really successful. So I think it was possibly less about our reputation and more about, as you are successful, you can start hanging other successes off that. And I also think it was about us becoming, once you have written an awful lot of bids, what I will say is keep every single answer that you write to every single question, every single box, and keep it in a catalogue so that you can start cutting and pasting. You'll never be able to completely cut and paste because they're all worded differently, but you will have this massive bank of questions and answers that you can draw on. How involved were your trustees in the development of your strategy before they signed it off? We had an initial kickoff meeting with them, so quite a lot at that stage, and then we did the work, and then we went back and refined it with them, and then we did more work, and then we got it signed off by them. So I would say they were involved appropriately. We gave them more involvement up front because that felt like the most sensible way to get the discussion that's really rich and helpful and starts us down a road without them getting too into the nitty-gritty and the detail. So they were involved, but at appropriate points. And I would say with something like this, draw on them. If you've got trustees that have particular experience, then draw on it. I do know I'm involved in or I'm soon to become a trustee of another charity, and I know that they have had frustrations in the past where their trustees have been kind of looking for the magic answer that they believe isn't in the fundraising strategy. You know, they keep thinking that there must be some incredible something that's going to open up all sorts of new opportunities, and there's not. You know, it's just kind of hard graft. The one thing actually that's slightly different that we've been exploring is social outcomes contracts. Those, I think for pause, the jury is still very much out, but we're investigating them and seeing whether they work for us. and we have two different models of social outcomes contract. One is the funder is paid back by the local authority if we achieve the outcomes. So the funder pays for pause, and if the outcomes are achieved, the local authority pays the funder back with interest. So the funder makes profit. And the other model we have, which is really interesting, and we only have it in Scotland at the moment because that's the only place it operates as far as I know at the moment, is called social bridging finance. And in that model, the funder provides a grant to the local authority to deliver pause for 2 years. And if they meet the outcomes, the local authority agrees to deliver for a further 2 years. So it's a kind of try before you buy arrangement where the local authority gets funded on, and it's contingent, you know, only will they get that funding if they sign a contract to say, providing the outcomes are met, they'll continue the funding. Those are really interesting. They're really time consuming, really resource heavy. And I'd be happy, you know, if anyone was looking at any kind of social outcomes contract, then drop me a line and we'll have a conversation about it because they're complicated.
Thank you, Jules. That was brilliant. Just a few more minutes if anyone else has got any more questions, but I've just got one question that's kind of a bit of a corollary to the financing and reporting one, but also to that one as well, because obviously measuring social impact and measuring outcomes is critical. But what we've found in a lot of what heads of service of libraries are telling us is that it's often a difficult culture change to start to get people to really kind of record information about the people using services. And given you're coming from a perspective where the risk is less about breaching GDPR and actually it's a risk of physical harm to people potentially if information's mislaid, have you got any tips around that, I suppose?
Yeah, I guess you're right that it's not difficult to get our practices to record information because they are effectively, they've all been in sort of public facing or care jobs, and they're monitoring their care to a person and they're used to capturing that information and using it. However, one of the things which is an eternal frustration to me actually is that what we really want to understand, we know we have anecdotal examples of pause practices that are making a real difference to the way that systems work locally. They change the way that other parts of the local authority work with vulnerable groups, and that's amazing, and I'd like to know more about that. Can I get those practices to write that down and send it to us and so that we can learn from it and share it back out to them? No, I cannot. So it is difficult. It is difficult to try and get people to collect the data and monitor the data that you need to demonstrate that you're having an impact. And I think the only thing to do is to start talking to people about why you're asking them to collect it. And this starting point of, you know, the world is in a funding crisis. Public funds are dwindling and we're going to have to be fighting for a bigger piece of a smaller pie and finding other people to talk to who know nothing about libraries, you know, who have never even set foot in one, but might be persuaded to fund one or fund something in one. And so encouraging people to collect stuff. Encouraging people to collect stuff because it will make a difference is my best advice. And then telling them that they have to. Making it mandatory, setting up quarterly reports that they have to fill in. I mean, I know it's not a nice kind of happy, friendly, cultural thing, but sometimes you just say to people, I need this information.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that's brilliant. And Isabel's just put another question in the chat as well. So about was there a broader cultural change needed as well to help staff embrace the need for fundraising and income generation rather than seeing that DFE funding as some sort of right and it should be being done by them?
That's a really, really good question. Yes, there was a bit of, and it was less, do you know, it was less that the DFE money was seen as a right, and it was more that, so 50% of the practitioners who work for pause are social workers or have been social workers. And lots of the people working in the national team are or have been social workers. And for them, delivering a statutory service, the money has always been there, even in tight times. And they may have had to experience pay freezes, and they may have had horrible workloads and all of that, but actually it was always paid for. So the cultural shift that has had to happen is less that the DFE money is a right, and more that the money is going to have to be earned from somewhere, that it's not just going to appear. So it was less about entitlement and more about just, oh, well, it always gets paid for in the end, doesn't it, kind of thing. So yeah, that we have had to have some conversations about that, and it's difficult for people to think differently about fundraising. And what I have tended to do is just ask people to think about the things that they would love to do, because the more you can ask people to think about the stuff that they would really like to make happen for the women that people work, the women that work for with Pause, the more they get excited about the potential for doing that, and the more they want to think about how they'll fund it. So it's just about engaging in what's exciting for people. I'm conscious that I've talked for a really long time, sorry.
It's not a problem at all. It's been incredibly useful. So thank you for that, Jules. And Jules is obviously staying for the rest of the webinar, and we'll bring Jules in. In fact, we'll hold that question that's just come through to later on. So we've now got Emma Noyce from Hampshire Library Services, who've been through some big changes over the past couple of years. And Emma's going to give a bit of a presentation, and then we'll have some questions for Emma, but we'll be able to bring Jules into the questions as well.
Hi, everyone. Just let me turn it onto the slideshow. Can you see that? The question of the era. Can you see the slideshow in front of you? Yeah, I'm getting some nods. Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you, Ian. And that was really interesting. Jules coming out from a different perspective. To reiterate again, I'm another person who's here talking to you about commercial strategy and income, who is not an expert in the field. I've seen the names of some of the people in this room, and I think there are probably people in the room that are far more qualified than I to talk about it. But that said, in Hampshire, we have been increasingly focused on developing our commercial strategy over the last few years. And we generate 1.8 million a year in income. And I just want to tell you a little bit about our journey and our approach. First part of this is a bit of theory, and then I'll give you a practical application of it in our library service. I will tackle that cultural change question head on as well, because I think it's very pertinent in the world of libraries. So just to give you a little bit of context on how it started, Hampshire County Council, we're not a traditional outsourcing authority. We don't have county councillors who feel that we should generally outsource the work we do. However, there is a strong feeling that Hampshire County Council is a modern business delivering public services. So there's a very commercial mindset running through it. In May 2019, I think it was, I was appointed head of service. We just had a new director in our department, and we were also just landed with £1.76 million savings target or income, and it was up to us how we found that £1.76 million budget reduction. My new director came in and said, it's all right, we're going to charge everybody if we charge every active member of the library service £10 each, then that's our £1.76 million. So we had to kind of just gently talk to her about the libraries and the 64 Act, the Libraries and Museums Act, talk about the fact that libraries by very nature, it's so important that they're free and accessible to everybody. And so we had to kind of talk her down from charging every library member £10. However, that did set us on a direction of travel, in the sense that we did want to look at how we could take that principle and explore what opportunities there were for additional generation of income in Hampshire. So that's how we started. Isabel will love this, because I think Isabel and Ian know that I love a triangle, and I swear that if a strategy is worth its salt, it can be described in a triangle. So I want to talk a little bit about what we mean about being more commercial. I think from my point of view, wherever you are on the spectrum of how you feel about libraries generating income or making a profit, if you think about it as a commercial mindset, then there's something there for anyone, wherever your authority happens to be on that spectrum. So when we talk about being more commercial, what I don't mean is exploiting people. It doesn't necessarily mean starting up loads of new trading business, and it doesn't necessarily mean just looking at profit. I think, as I say, there's something for everyone, and I think it for us, we kind of came down to these 3 areas. So financial sustainability, really understanding your areas where you might have opportunities for income and what efficiencies you might make. Evidence-based decision making, so exactly what Jules said about being on top of your numbers, knowing a game and knowing how much costs you. And then that people development and that cultural side. So developing that cultural mindset at all levels. So I'll just take a moment to go through each of those and then come back to our example. So what do we mean by financial sustainability? About generating income and making efficiencies whilst making sure that we're continuing to deliver services with high value. So there were 4 things in this, I think, for us when we looked at it. So the first one was really simply understanding the customer journey and making sure our processes were as efficient as possible, and just that kind of just understanding how our customers used our services and where we were putting in barriers or blockers or where it was costing us more than it needed to was really helpful. And that enabled us to do some self-service things online, and we, for example, our grant scheme that we managed as a department, we were able to make a few changes in that just to make it more efficient. The second part of that for us was recognizing where we're best placed to provide a service and where we're not, because actually we don't have to do everything for everyone. And sometimes our library service is brilliant at doing certain things, and there are other areas that we're working in that we kind of thought, well, actually, there are other people doing this better. So would it work better if we had more of a partnership relationship with people who for whom this is their specialism? And I think that's exactly where Jules is filling the niche in the market. The local authorities are recognizing that there are other organizations that can support the delivery of this. The third thing under financial sustainability for us was really understanding our supply chain and our procurement. So making sure that we're getting best value of that. And that could be on the large scale contracts, or it could be as simple as we looked at our retail, and every single admin assistant in every area or different people in different libraries were going and purchasing stock for their library kind of retail areas on their own. And we said, well, hang on a minute, we could do this centrally. We could reduce the amount of stock we're selling, narrow it down to a few items that we procure, and then we've got a better kind of more efficient system for that. So understanding our supply chain was really important. And the last one, I kind of grit my teeth as I mention it, because the other bit of this one was about using the best of digital to benefit the customers and our internal processes. And I grit my teeth because there are some of you in this room who are in the local authority. There are some of you who are who work in mutuals or spin outs. And for those of you who are not bound by local authority IT, I salute you, because you can just do things. And we are delighted because we have a donations button on our website now, which has taken probably 3 years to get there. But that digital, that maximizing the use of digital is really important, and is something that's still a work in progress. The second area, it really, if you do nothing else, this will help everything that you do. So the first one, just going back to that point, understanding the costs of what we deliver, making sure we're pricing things to cover the full cost or justify where we deliver a subsidised service. So exactly what Ian was saying about that dual bottom line. And for us, doing some activity-based costing, so really understanding the direct cost of delivering stuff and the indirect cost, was really important. And I think we have certainly been guilty in the past of putting in applications for funding and grants and going, yeah, it's going to cost us this based on what we're aware of. And then you actually unpick it and think, wow, we're really subsidising this piece of work. So that was really useful for us. The other bit that was really interesting was, because we were in consultation mode around our wider transformation programme, we took the opportunity to do some work on understanding our markets in that point. And by our markets, I mean kind of our customers and where our opportunities might be. And that really was interesting to us. I think that was a really valuable thing in addressing the cultural issue about what our staff thought about being asked to generate income. Because what we found is that when questioned, and this was both current library members and or users of library services and people who don't use library services, of those, 50% of the people we asked said that they'd be happy to pay for the core services that libraries provide. So we didn't tell our assistant director that bit because we thought it would just get too messy. But 84% of people said that they'd be happy for libraries to charge for some of the additional services that they provide. So there's a real sense from the public that where things were provided in addition to the core service, people valued that, and there are a lot of people who want to contribute to the running of those additional offers. We dug a bit deeper to find out what sort of things might be suitable, and the headline response was that traditional retail functions like shops and restaurants weren't felt by our members of the public to offer much in the way of value, and they actually jarred with what their idea of what a library should be. But what people really warmed to was things around education and personal development. That was much more appealing territory for people, and it really chimed with their kind of overall views of what they want to be spending their money on, and the way they've been living their lives. And the last thing that I'd say under this bit is that, just as Jules had said around writing grant applications, being able to justify and measure your progress through business cases, financial modelling, that kind of thing, that's so important, and it really helps to bust some assumptions. So one of the things that we did as part of kind of understanding our Winchester Discovery Centre is our biggest library. I think it's the third most visited county library building in the country. And it has a large performance hall, which is absolutely great. And we thought we made loads of money out of it. We're like, yeah, we make loads of money out of doing that. We hire it out, we do this kind of thing. And actually what we did was we developed a heat map of, we mapped, it was really, really visual, a map of the week, every hour that room was open for hire. And we mapped it in kind of red for when it's generating full income for that room, green for when it's kind of generating cost recovery income, so when it's kind of being used by a charity or for a subsidized use, blue for when it was free, and grey for when it was not used at all. And we thought that room was working really hard, and what we discovered through that process was that it was probably being used 56% of its available time, and actually for the rest of it was idle. And of that available time, it was that we felt that there was more money we could get from the hire of that room. So just that really helped to turn the mindset of that team around, who thought, actually, we're doing all we can here, there's nowhere else to go. So being able to do that measurement and that kind of very clear demonstration was really helpful. And the final bit, the people development and the culture. So I think we wanted to make it as easy and as safe as possible as we could for people to be commercial, particularly in the library service, where there's so much anxiety and understandable concern about how far you go on this route. So we really decided we wanted to support staff with development opportunities. We really felt it was important to have a kind of shared ownership of the commercial element of our delivery. So, for example, our libraries, we have 48 or had 48 libraries in Hampshire, divided into 5 areas. Every one of those 5 areas was given a £10,000 target for additional income. So they could split that up how they wanted. They could do that how they wanted. We gave people the opportunity to try and fail. But what we wanted to do is everybody, whether it was £250, £500, to be able to contribute something to this, and that really helped develop some innovation. The other thing that we felt under this particular theme was really recognising that our workforce is going to be on a journey here. It's a big step. It's a different ask than has been previously made of our staff. So that was about making sure that there was training and guidance and toolkits in place to make things, as I say, as easy as possible. And the final part of that kind of jigsaw was making sure that we were sharing information and knowledge. So making sure that where things were successful, using kind of our newsletter, just really shining a light on some things that have been tried and worked, or some ideas that people had. So that's the kind of theory part of it, and I just want to kind of talk a little bit about how that was actually applied. So we have kind of gone with a twin track approach. So the first part of that was really about recognizing that if you want to grow this area, you do need to invest in it. You can't cut and grow income at the same time in this space. So we actually created a business case for a role in the team who was to be focused not just on kind of business and commercial, but on building partnerships as well and developing our networks, and some of the maybe longer term slow burns that actually weren't going to be achieved overnight. But we managed to put together a business case that said over a course of time, this post will recover the cost of the post and more. So that was the kind of top level approach. But then also we very deliberately chose that we wanted to support and build commercial skills at a local level. And with that end, we wanted to make sure that we engaged the workforce with developing the strategy. So that the graphic on the screen, the information exchange, was actually our staff conference in 2019. We had a staff conference and we had a theme of commerciality running through it quite gently, not kind of in your face, but actually that was one of the themes. And that kind of set the scene, but also generated some real ideas and opportunities. So that some of the things that came out of that staff conference, we had conversations about what our USPs were as a library service. What was it that was different about us? So we recognised things that these bullet points, I won't read them all out, but there'll be things that you all recognise about library services: being trusted, having a great reach in the community, and having a kind of real good mix of opportunity with partners. And just as a kind of demonstration, you probably won't be able to read the figures, but this is a kind of cut of our, I think this is our Facebook post for a 28-day period over Christmas, just a random cut. And obviously Christmas is a quiet period. Our posts reached 86,500 people. We had nearly 9,000 people click on one of our posts, whether that's a like or a comment, and 1,900, nearly 2,000 clicks on links, so follow throughs from that post. And by anyone's standards, that's an asset. That's a really powerful reach we had there. So we recognised that we did have a number of USPs as a library service. The other thing we did was, again, this is probably too tiny for you to read, but this is we kind of did an opportunity map, and this was really a kind of brainstorm of ideas, really, that we've kind of neatly parceled off into groups, but just in terms of where our kind of scope for or opportunities for growth might be, whether that's in terms of our customers and our outward facing things, in terms of working with partners, funding and people. So that was a kind of collective effort, and everybody could see their ideas going into that. So that kind of started us off. I just want to give one quick example of where that kind of got to on the theme of sponsorship. So we worked with people across the service who'd shown an interest to kind of come up with some examples of some of the asset, and this is thinking about our services in a very different way, thinking of sponsorable assets. So what things might there be that people or other companies might want to sponsor? So we came up with this list of things. I would say this, not everything on the list is necessarily suitable or doable, but it was the sorts of things that kind of popped up. So library cards, our reading challenge, our book awards, events and activities, that kind of thing. So some bits there. And then just to articulate this twin track approach I've been talking about in terms of having the top down and the bottom up. So we did say, actually, we're looking for 1 or 2 large scale partnerships. We're looking for corporate sponsors that might want to join us to give us kind of fairly substantial wadges of money. And we did a bit of work on what those prospects might be, and what they could include. And what we did was developed what the people who know these things call a media pack. I don't know if I call it a media pack, but it was just kind of glossy brochure, really. And it really articulated what library services did. We included some quite fact and figure based stuff. So if anyone has done kind of Colourworks Insights or anything like that, the real kind of numbers and really kind of businessy stuff in terms of our reach, our demographic. And we gave examples of how businesses could be involved in our services. And that really was driven by our business and partnerships officer doing that and going out there. But at the same time, we wanted to have a very local approach to that sponsorship as well. So we developed a branch pack, and that included things like room hire, being able to sell advertising space, digital screens and banners, having exhibitions or pop-ups or drop-in sessions. And what we did there, we developed this toolkit, we rolled it out, and we gave everybody the opportunity to just try anything they fancied in it. And it's things like one library got paid, and it small amounts, but it all adds up. I think about £50 to have a banner outside on the railings. And it was no, I don't think you'd even know it was our railings, but it's bits like that that people were able to kind of grasp and run with. And then some of the examples of where we've had success. So our order and collect, our Ready Read service, BorrowBox sponsored all the bags for that. So we were able to have branded bags, a very quick turnaround at the start of the pandemic when we stood up a click and collect service that was sponsored, so we didn't have to pay for them. We have people advertising in the buildings. We have a local solicitor that partnered 2 of our libraries and actually ran will writing sessions. Some issues around that in terms of the ethics, because we have to be really careful that any company, we're very well aware that companies that actually there could be an association in people's minds with companies that are working in libraries or advertising in libraries, that therefore they are trusted. So we have to be very careful about how we show the public that relationship, and it's not necessarily us endorsing them, but actually choosing those companies and working with trading standards to make sure that these are trusted companies in Hampshire. So loads of stuff happening on that front. Probably COVID didn't necessarily help in terms of it was going in a really upward trajectory, and then things kind of halted a little bit as we've come out of branch, but lots of stuff happening, and things like having a donations policy and feeling a little bit more confident about when and where it's right to ask for donations, that kind of thing. Our learning in libraries offer, and really being able to understand that that's a grant funded offer, but making sure that we can extend that in a way that covers its costs, and understanding where the audience is for that. And again, just to wrap up mine in the same sort of way, what we've learned and what our ingredients of success are. So we found it beneficial to think about commercial thinking in its wider sense, not just about profit, but about those commercial tools that you can use to make a service more efficient, whether or not you're looking to make additional income or not. To make sure that we're developing a culture of commercial thinking at all levels of the service. To make it, to develop your consistent approach, so make it as easy as possible for people to be commercial by having things like a media pack, a price list, guidance for staff, and kind of things like even simple as a booking form that was universal to everybody. And finally, making sure that you really do address those ethical concerns about who and how you should work with people. Don't ignore it, but work with your values, not against them. And it's okay to turn people down. It's okay to say there's an opportunity here, but it's just not right for us. So that was really important for us as well. So I think that's all I wanted to say. I shall stop sharing the screen. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. That was brilliant. And also really heartening to hear that some of the things that you've been able to do have actually managed to continue over the past year as well.
Yeah.
And find new opportunities like your BorrowBox sponsored your grab bags. I'm just going to bring Jules in as well as we answer these questions, because one of the questions which came just at the end of Jules's was, have you had a time when you've had to shrink expenditure in lean years for funding, which I think you could probably both answer quite comprehensively. So do you want to go first, Emma, and then Jules, if you've got anything to add to that as well?
Sorry, can you say that again? I broke up just then. Sorry, typically.
So have you had a time when you've had to shrink expenditure in lean years for funding? Well,
I think from our point of view, this was done in the context of a transformation strategy where we had to save £1.76 million. So we've had to do this in a way that recognises that there is a lot of risk around generating income, and obviously with COVID going on, exactly that. So I think Jules might have a.
Well, I mean, yes, actually not at Pause. We've grown our income over the last few years, but I was, before being at Pause, I was at Brook, which is a young people's sexual health service, and we had to shrink quite considerably there actually. And I think so I have no idea about library budgets. I don't know what your cost categories are and how much you spend on what, but the vast majority of our costs in all the organisations I've been responsible for have been staff. And there is, in my experience, only so far you can cut non-staff things before you have to look at staff. And I think the main thing I learned at Brooke was that I didn't take those decisions quickly enough and act on them swiftly enough, and that just made matters worse. And I think if you believe that the only thing that you can do to cut costs is to cut staff, you have to do it clearly and swiftly and fairly. And I didn't do that the first time I had to do it, and I learned a really difficult lesson from that.
Yes, absolutely. I'd concur with that as well. So my previous background was in an organisation, an adoption support organisation, which in the end was unsuccessful, and we ended up folding it. And I think one of the decisions that got us to that point was not being as aggressive in terms of cutting staffing costs. We tried to maintain as much of the expertise and the and the personalities and the friends that you develop in an organisation as well. And it's really difficult to take those steps. And I think that's probably something that a lot of the library service will have to be possibly thinking about over the coming few months as well.
Yeah, and those are impossible things to think about, because every single person that you end up having to cut leaves a gap, leaves something, and that's where those conversations that I'm sure you will have about the things that you have to not do any longer, you know, what things are we going to stop? Well, when you have to take out a person, those conversations become far more real, because you actually also don't have the people to do them. You've got to stop doing them because you simply can't do them anymore.
Yeah. That brings us neatly to the next question, in fact, which is from Jill. And the question is, I think, to Emma. Do you have an example of something you have stopped doing?
Yeah, so I think that probably came in with the bit I was talking about, kind of understanding your costs and where it's right for you to work and where not. And I think events is the kind of example I'd use on that. So we have a distinction between events and activities tend to be things that we offer as part of the service that are part of our core offer, and we don't necessarily charge for, whereas events are ticketed things that are kind of programmed in. And when we did a bit of work on the event side of things, we found that although we thought we were making a modest income on those, actually when you looked at the staff cost and how much time it was taking to develop an events program for the service, that actually we were making quite a substantial loss, and I do mean substantial loss when you took into account the staff funding. And therefore what we kind of fairly recently decided was that it would probably be better for us not to run an events program ourselves, but work with a partner. So actually work with a partner and look at if a partner organisation could program events on behalf of us, still adhering to kind of the library, the vision and the things that we want to achieve, but not necessarily us doing the programming and that side of it ourselves. So that's a kind of really useful way of approaching it for us.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to look down the questions. Someone's asked, how much money have you made from donations?
About 12.5p. We had a really entertaining. We decided that we'd try donations a couple of years ago, and I can see that my colleague Emma Evans has joined here, who's kind of a bit more close to it than I. So what we did, we got some perspex. We sort of like, oh yeah, you know, like when you go into the Natural History Museum and they got a big box as you go in with money in it, and people put your money. So we're like, I'll try one of those. We looked that up, and I can't remember how much they cost, but it was like £1,000 or something ridiculous. So we got these little perspex post boxes, and then I think because of the kind of mindset of the library service, that we didn't want to be in too much in people's faces. One of them was put up in Winchester Discovery Centre, and honestly, you had to hunt it down. It was behind a door and it was really hard to find. And I think after about 3 months, it had made, I think about £8.87 in shrapnel. We have then, so I don't think it's quite covered the cost of its box yet. But that said, we're finding more luck with digital donations, and this is only very recently started, but having that donate button and being able to couple that with things that we're advertising on blogs. So we're just doing really silly things at the moment, like we've we've done a blog about library Zoom backgrounds. If you want to have your library in the background, here's a couple of, and just put a big donations button in your face there. So we're not asking for it. It's not really taken any time to do it, but there's and things like an escape room. So we had an escape room, and again, it was kind of themed with donate here buttons. So I would say that the donations bit is a work in progress, and we look to other authorities who are better at chatting up rich people than we are, and looking at what they're doing at the moment. But yeah, slow burn on that one, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. I've just got a note from Isabel as well. So an interesting presentation from Tyne Weir Musicians about museums, about donations and the culture change needed there as well.
Yeah,
and I think that's
absolutely.
probably something that has happened in a lot of social care and social services charities as well, where you've got people who come from local authority backgrounds as well, through the social work route, and embedding that charity mentality into them as well. Another question is just from Luke Burton in Newcastle as well. How did you engage with people who didn't use the library services?
So, Luke, do you mean in terms of funders or potential customers?
So I think it was when you were saying, obviously, you got the view from people who use services, but did you engage with people who don't use your services? That from the
yeah. In that sense, when we did that, we actually did a bit of we got a bit of funding for an external consultancy survey where they used focus groups, and they kind of phoned people. I think they phoned about 1,000 people across Hampshire. So just because we felt for our wider transformation strategy, it was really important to understand the views of non-users and why they might use libraries or why they didn't use libraries. So yeah, so that was through a kind of market research specialist company that did that for us.
Great, thanks.
Thanks. Can I just bring Jules in as well, because the work that Jules does at Pause obviously is focused on people who often don't receive services that they should be receiving, and who are often kind of ignored by the system as well. So I suspect there'll be a lot that you've done around kind of really engaging people who can't be engaged through traditional means, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although I think in terms of the work, at the heart of our Pause model is a form of assertive outreach, and a kind of tenacity around accepting the difficulties of working with women who aren't traditionally able to access services. So, we talk a lot about rupture and repair, and a meeting with a woman may end very, very badly, with her throwing a chair and storming out and not being able to engage in that conversation at all. But that doesn't mean the end of the relationship. So I think for us, in terms of reaching hard to reach, that is what we do, and we don't use that language. But I think it's also that it's a different kettle of fish, really. They're probably in many cases not library users, but that's because they are not users of any services at all, and in fact they not really users of anything often. So it's a little bit different, I think.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah. Thank you. We've then got two more questions. So Martin Burton from South Gloucestershire. With the will making, did you approach several firms to avoid favouring or endorsing one firm? And then also, did you promote the service on social media?
Yeah, so we had with sponsorships in general, we had this kind of twin track approach where from a higher level we decided that there were some companies that we'd kind of assertively go out and see if we could charm, and that was a kind of range of opportunities across Hampshire. With the will writing, I think it came from the kind of the "you could be advertising here" type posters, which led to a conversation. So we didn't actually kind of go, oh, we're going to procure it and give everybody the opportunity of applying, but we did have that kind of conversation within our team about how do we avoid the kind of suggestion of favoritism, and we decided that we had 48 libraries and they were only in 2, so we had plenty of space for everybody if they wanted to come forward. In terms of what we promoted on social media, we didn't promote the kind of partnership, but we promoted the event, if you like, in a way that we promote any event that was taking part in a building, if in one of our buildings, if somebody asked us. So we probably did 1 or 2 Facebook posts about the fact that there was a will writing session, but it was really heavily caveated, so that kind of goes back to our natural fear that people will associate it as something that was endorsed by the library service. So we did kind of caveat it quite heavily for those ones.
Brilliant, thank you. So you haven't created a procurement and commissioning policy and process around those?
Not around that, no.
Fair enough.
I think we're just grateful at the moment for anyone. So.
And a final question, although please get more questions in because we've still got another 10 minutes. Do you charge internal partners for room hire?
Oh my goodness, it's just such hard work. Yes, yes, we do, but in a really complex way. So what we did, we kind of worked, and again, this goes back to the activity-based costing type model and knowing your costs. What we said was, well, hang on a minute. The easiest area is kind of external private hire, which is kind of just general hire for people that don't have any special requirements, and you can charge what you want for that. And then we worked out how much it costs actually to hire our how much it cost us to provide the room. So we'd done some work on our property anyway in terms of the running cost of buildings. So we worked out kind of a square meterage of how much the running cost of the building could be attributed to each kind of meeting room. And we came up with a really basic rate. And what we kind of did was said for internal partners, we wouldn't want to make a profit out of them, but we do need them to cover the cost, because otherwise the library service is subsidising internal partners covering the cost. So what we actually have is a rate for internal partners that recognising that Hampshire County Council, in terms of its repairs and maintenance budget, is always going to have to repair that room. So it's not their fault that that room has to be repaired, but day-to-day kind of electricity, running costs, communal areas, cleaning, that's apportioned to the room. So we were able to kind of come up with a price list that said, this is internal partners, and it is just basic costs of running the room. We've got a kind of external charity rate, which is that plus a bit of admin time for staff. And then we've got the full on private hire. So we try and maintain a balance. And of course, we're a political organisation. So if somebody political says, no, you do need to give this person the room for free, then we'll have that conversation. But yeah, it's been a slog getting to it, but now we've got to it. It's actually quite easy to implement because we've got the evidence base there, and yeah, it's reasonable.
Brilliant, thank you. Last call for questions, if anyone's got any more. But just to highlight as well, we've got, so some of the webinars coming up, one of them will focus on activity-based costing and full cost recovery to help address issues like that. We've also got another one focusing on marketing, and the one not next week, the week after next, will be focusing on partnerships and partnership working as well, or strategic partnerships. On that note, Jules, given we've got a lot of heads of service here, thank you for your time. And I was wondering if there's anything that libraries and library services could be doing to support the work of PAWS, whether it's through referrals or promoting information and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think the majority of our practices use library space where it's available for our events, activities with women. So our activities tend to, much of it is one-to-one, but increasingly we also have group activities where it's appropriate, and obviously when we can be face-to-face. So I think that actually in terms of that, I was listening to Emma and being very impressed by being able to know your figures as well as down to the cost of a room to the building. But we're definitely using library buildings, but also there's quite a heavy, we weren't expecting this when we first started PAWS, but a lot of the women that we work with talk to us about wanting to improve their literacy levels. So quite a number of practices focused around actually not just literacy, numeracy as well, and adult education and reading. You know, some of the stuff that's really at the heart of libraries. And I have to confess, I've not really ever done a great deal of work in PAWS thinking about libraries and talking to the practices about libraries. So rather than anything that your heads of service could particularly do for us, I shall definitely be going back and thinking about, you know, how we can be making better use of libraries and what work we could do together locally, for sure.
Fantastic, thank you. And we've got one final question, I think, for Emma. Have you had any feedback or resistance from customers at all?
Not in my happy little bubble, I don't think. But then maybe it doesn't quite get to me. I don't know if I'm just looking at Emma's face. She might shake or nod or something like that. I think more from staff than customers. I think staff in certain things have kind of questioned and nervous, and rightly so. And we've had those conversations, but I don't think we've had any. I think it's mainly stuff like, well, I'll tell you where we did get some pushback was interlibrary loans, where we did a costing exercise of interlibrary loans and worked out that actually it cost us about 60 quid a pop to service an interlibrary loan if you took into account everything, possibly quite a lot more for an international interlibrary loan. So we did put our charges up, not for full cost recovery, but it was a substantial hike, and obviously that was not necessarily popular with the small number of people who were regular customers of the interlibrary loan service. So things like that, but nothing in general. And we haven't had any pushback on things like donations or people suggesting that we shouldn't be asking donations because we're a library service, things like that.
Is it helpful to say as well, Emma, we had in our recent consultation, the feedback was really quite strong that people were quite comfortable to pay for things over and above what they consider to be, the statutory function of the library service. And that, I think that's an important part of our culture to kind of take with us through our kind of customer communication and beyond into the staff culture. And it's about recognizing our value. I think that can be a bit of an issue sometimes, just recognizing actually that we hold a value and that it is worthy of a donation.
Yeah. Brilliant. And one last question sneaking under the line about fines. Do you charge fines?
We do. We've kind of we've tried to look at how we can reduce it, but at the moment, in the context of the overall savings requirement, we just couldn't find an avenue out of them. Obviously, what we're hoping is that if we are able to generate income from another avenue, that might enable us to reduce significantly the kind of fine basis. But yes, unfortunately, we do still.
Is it a significant amount?
Let me remind myself. I had it written down a second ago. I don't know where I've put it. I think it's of that 1.8 million. I think it was. Oh, here we go. £150,000 in overdue. So of that 1.8 million, 150k is overdue fines. So, and another 74,000 in reservations. So it's a smaller proportion than, but against 250,000, for example, from lettings. So
yeah,
still we're trying to wheedle it down so we can find our way out of that one.
A good few staff salaries as well.
Yeah, indeed.
And Sue's iPad has asked, how well subscribed are your chargeable learning activities?
Oh, T'other Emma's the boss of this one.
For me to help.
That's amazing lately.
We've had some really good reaction to some of our charged for courses. We used to have paid for courses in a physical capacity, and obviously we now do them in a more digital way. We're trying to align them with our funded places, so our free courses, as a kind of next step. And it's difficult to quantify, but the impact of that is quite significant, and we are quite well signed up now for a number of our courses. We're actually crunching the numbers at the moment to see what level of improvement we have had since sort of launching a more digital offer in that regard. But generally speaking, it is quite well followed, our kind of paid for courses, and some of them have some associated costs with them as well, like maybe some of the art based courses, for example, and that's definitely something that we're looking at growing, our kind of paid for learning offer.
Brilliant, fantastic.
Just to clarify, when we talk about our kind of free courses, we actually get grant funding, and we've been really successful in securing, I think it's about £450,000 this year, grant funding from the Adult and Community Grant Programme to run our Learning in Libraries programme. So they're free to the public because we get grant funding to do it, and that's one of the examples where we had to really look carefully at how much it cost us to do to enable us to apply for the right level of grant funding for it. So 450k's worth of free funding plus then chargeable learning on top of that.
And that has grown year on year.
Brilliant, thank you. So Alison Jordan's just asked, what sort of courses? I don't know whether you've answered that, but if you've got any examples of the kind of courses.
Yeah, so the funded courses that Emma mentioned, just very briefly, we get funded for 2 streams. One of them is around kind of well-being and health, and the other strand is around works, so about employability. And then the courses that we do that are paid for tend to kind of stem from those. So there's lots of maybe like artistry, ukulele, craft activities, and then there are some courses specifically that are paid for around setting up your own business, for example. So we're kind of reflecting on our current levels of interest from our customer base and then extending that, like I said, as a next step from those sort of 2 main strands, the well-being and the works for employment.
Brilliant, thank you. So we wind up now. We've got 3 minutes to go, so there's just time for any final comments from Jules or either of the Emmas.
I'm actually really fascinated by libraries now.
We're fascinated by pause, so that's mutual.
I'm really happy if anybody wants to follow up with me, please do. And I'm on, as well as pause being on Twitter, I am as Rosie Light, ROSYLIGHT. So I'm very happy to carry on any conversations about libraries or pause on Twitter or by email, where I'm jules.hillier@pause.org.uk.
Sorry that I missed it, Jules, but thank you for for having us on and having a bit of a chat, because I think this way of working is incredibly helpful. And I know Ian and I are working with other colleagues on a Pathfinder group around income generating opportunities, which you may have already spoken about earlier. And the kind of sparks of ideas or recognition of shared challenges is always really helpful. So really important to have this forum.
Yes, and the recording of this will be on the Income Generation Network Basecamp group at some point next week. We've got the upcoming one, so every 2 weeks there's more of these. We're moving away from the workshop ideas because they didn't seem to work too well last time. And so thank you again, Jules. Thank you again, both the Emmas. If anyone wants to find out more about Pause, obviously go to pause.org.uk, or also Andrew Laird is doing a series of podcasts around social entrepreneurship and radical disruptors. And one of them, the most recent one, is Bruce Leake from Suffolk Libraries. It's really good to listen to that one as well. But also one of the ones about 6 months ago, it's on the feed, is with Sophie Humphreys, who is the founder of Pause as well. So there's more kind of, and she talks a lot about the ethical things around it as well. So do have a look at that. We'll put that bit of information back up on the Basecamp as well. But just want to say thank you again to everyone who's attended, and particularly to our 2 and then latterly 3 brilliant speakers.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.